Welcome to Champion Stepdad Podcast. We are exploring the unique role of stepdads, stepfathers, and bonus dads, and how to apply performance psychology skills to become better father figures and role models. We're building our band of brothers by focusing on two things: empathy, because being a stepdad is tough; accountability, because I get it. Being a stepdad is tough, but you chose to take on this role. There's no accidental stepdads, so use the opportunity to be the best father figure and mentor that you can be. We are your support and your accountability. Join the Champion Stepdad Facebook group and let's build this community. I'm your host, Neil Wattier. I'm a 16-year stepdad. I'm also a resilience trainer and a performance consultant. I believe in developing self-awareness, learning performance skills, and building a band of brothers to share my struggles and make our world better by becoming great men and outstanding stepdads. Today, I am posting a conversation I recorded with Matt Storm, who shares his experience as a child of divorce. He's very active on Clubhouse, where he created a group called Are You Man Enough? And it's a safe space to discuss issues related to being a man. He talks about male role models, the power of being a role model for others. He also touches on understanding what you bring into a relationship, both the good and the challenges. You can call it baggage, but really it is your life experiences. And you become a better partner, parent, and role model when you're willing to take a critical look at yourself and work to reinforce good attributes while relearning counterproductive behaviors. Enjoy this episode with Matt Storm. Matt Storm, thanks a lot for joining me on Champion Stepdad Podcast. How are you doing?
Always good, my friend. Good to see you, Neil.
Hey, man, this is a conversation I'm really excited about. You and I met on Clubhouse, and fairly early on to my experience on the app, I bumped into you. I heard you talk a couple times. Shortly after that is when you started your group called Are You Man Enough? Been in several conversations with you and several other guys and females as well, just coming in and talking about being a man, being, what's masculinity, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a father, all the subject. Like, nothing's off topic, and I just love it, man. So I'm really excited for this conversation. So I really appreciate your time. You're calling in from Houston, Texas, retired pro athlete. You've been married for a significant amount of time, and although this is a show dedicated to stepdads, there's a lot of things that we talk about being a dad in general, but then about being a man. And I know you come from a divorced family. What's your experience like, when you want to talk to, say, a stepdad audience? Where do you start?
Neil, that's a great question. By the way, thank you for the time and having me. It's truly a privilege and an honor to be here. We've gotten a chance to interact a little bit about this, and we've talked about blended families and co-parenting and, how to navigate through those waters and areas. And sometimes that can be a challenge, and it can be complicated because, how do kids react or children react when we have a nuclear family that sometimes gets split? So just a little bit about me. I've currently been married now for 11 years. Been with my wife. I've known her for almost 19 now, and we work together. We have a business together. If we rewind, when I grew up, my parents divorced at 4 years old. So I didn't really understand the concept of really what mom and dad looked like in a functioning relationship. So what ended up happening was I was looking for that male role model. When I moved to Texas from Chicago, I essentially had uncles, grandparents, and those were the male role models in my life that I needed to look up to figure out what it was to be a man, and really how, boys are supposed to turn into men, and what's the rite of passage? How do we treat women? And so my sister, who's 7 years older, she moved out. I lived with my mom and my sister, and she moved out at 16 years old. And so at the time I was I was 9, and I wanted to, really figure out, so what do I need to do to be independent? And my stepfather ended up coming into our lives, I would say, when I was about 10. So, it was a really interesting relationship because I really wasn't sure how to respond. I would spend the summers with my dad, and he was an airline pilot. So I would see him maybe 20 days out of the summer. And I would actually spend the rest of the time in Houston with my mom. So, My stepdad was someone who always had these boundaries that were kind of, hey, I'm here for you, and I want you to know that I'm here for you, but I'm not going to be a strict enforcer of discipline because, he kind of looked at me as a bonus child, right? We hear these things in the rooms as far as he would own our relationship. He also wouldn't overstep his bounds. And I think that was a key to our success, definitely when I was growing up and learning from him and getting involved in the way he did things and the way he saw things.
And that's interesting because I wouldn't say it's a debate, but it's definitely a large conversation that I get into, because some of the first things that when I talk to stepdads, the issues that come up are discipline. So discipline was by far the number one thing. And I've done a couple talks on that one. For the people that are listening, if you've gone through the series, you've heard my thoughts on discipline, and that discipline is not punishment. Discipline is distinct from punishment. Discipline is you're instructing, you're teaching. And that's where the role model and the father figure comes in. But it's learning and accepting what is the role and what role do I play in this? And it's, I don't know if you're fortunate or unfortunate, I don't know what you want to call it. It's just life, right? Because it's not something that I can write a book or you can write a book and say, this is how you be a stepdad. Because as soon as you do that, somebody's going to walk in and say, well, here's my situation that doesn't apply to me, right? Because there's so many different situations. And it's funny that you talk about, being blended family is like the new norm. I mean, how many people are in a nuclear family? I grew up in a nuclear family, and there was a significant amount of conflict when I was being raised, and there was a couple of times where I'm like, my parents should just separate. Like, this is not working out, right? And that's from a young person, and I didn't understand the concept of, figuring stuff out. But, in a little bit of selfishness on my part, being vulnerable, but blended families are the new norm. And there's so many different scenarios and situations when you talk about stepdads and stepmoms and blended. And then you get into the relationships where they're not married, and you could even get into foster care and adopting. Like, there's so many scenarios. And what we're talking about, and this is not just where I'm just trying to work with stepdads, because there are a lot of situations. I talked with early on a friend of mine, Dijon Moore from the UK. He raised his two nephews after their mom died. That was a significant change because that was very sudden. So you have the grief on top of it. So I think there's a lot that goes into trying to figure out what the role is. And I think that's a great example of what your stepdad did, is he basically set you up to knock it out of the park. He's like, look, I'm going to let you lead this thing. I'm going to let your mom lead this thing. And I think that's something that we all can learn from. The problem is it's much easier said than done. So let's tease that out a little bit more. How did that play out long term?
Yeah, that's a great question, Neil. And, the way it played out is very simple. I want to come back to a point that you mentioned that I thought was really critical. There is no blueprint, right? And every landscape is different. So, if you're looking to build a house, what you're going to do is you're going to go to someone who kind of knows the land, right? Number one, you can build it with a foundation of concrete or pier and beam. So you have to think, do I have a slab or pier and beam? And the answer is, well, you have to really look at where the house is going to be built. If you're going to build it where hurricanes come through, you're probably going to want piers. So the way that our relationships between our fathers are constructed is definitely different, even 5 years ago, than it is now. And, when I think about, I'll be 44 here, here shortly. And I think about, even 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when I was a kid, I didn't understand the concept of divorce the way it's now. And the reason why is because the divorce rate has been skyrocketing, and some people are in multiple marriages, meaning they've been divorced not once, but twice, or even 3 times in this case. So
I've been divorced twice. Yeah, there you go.
Yes. My wife comes from a both divorced 3 times each. So you want to talk about baggage that we carry with us. To navigate that landscape is not easy. And it's an ever-changing, ever-evolving, moving target. And so, how we dealt with that was very simple. I'd like to say that I learned everything from one person, but I think it's a conglomeration. I think what a big help for my stepfather was is that I didn't get in very much trouble. I didn't want to act out and rebel. And the reason why I knew that is because I saw my mom struggle, and we had just enough, to get by. We didn't have the things that we wanted. We had the things that we needed. And when I saw that she was trying to do her best, I didn't want to be another responsibility or an obligation to her. So I think I was fortunate in the fact that she did work very hard for us as a family. My dad wasn't involved, which was his choice. I learned to forgive that and say, you know what? We can't control others' choices. What we can control is how we behave and how we respond to situations. So the way I navigated that is whatever my mother chose and who she chose to be with that made her happy and made her fulfilled was something that I needed to honor as a son. Because that was important, that she really get that payback and get that reward in something that she deserved, because she spent most of her life sacrificing herself for my sister and me. And so the way this played out was very simple. I mean, we have a great relationship, and it's something that we really look forward to. We've never really had major conflicts or fallouts. And I think the power of forgiveness and grace, not knowing that everything goes perfectly, is something that the new norm is. And how we deal with that when things aren't going according to plan is really going to determine the long-term or sustainable relationship that we want to continue to have, grow, and foster. So I have to say that I'm really happy with the relationship that we've had, and also really honored that they gave me the space to be able to really cultivate that and curate that so we could have that and grow up together, not force things on us for views or beliefs. We tended to learn our views and beliefs on experience and lessons as opposed to textbook or theoretical. And I think that's where we won in our family.
Well, and you talk a lot about, bringing in your experiences, bringing in baggage. I've been divorced twice. I'm engaged to somebody now, and she's got 2 young children. And it's been you talk about experiences, man. My biological kids are 21 and 25. My stepson's 19, and now, Cindy's got a 7 and a 9-year-old. You talk about throwing back into it, and it's different situation, different personalities. With an engaged father, he's fully involved in the his life. We're not friends, but we don't dislike each other. He's a good dude. But it's just interesting to see that even with my experience, and I tell people over and over, man, Champion Stepdad is just as much for me as it is for everybody else. I don't want to be coming on the microphone and just telling people what to do, because that is not at all what I'm trying to do. I don't know what I'm doing. I've got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old starting all over again with all my preconceived notions and all my assumptions and all my belief systems that I have to challenge. And I talk a lot about that. The experiences you bring in, your belief system determines your thoughts, and your thoughts determine your emotions and your physical reactions. Like, there's a lot of self-awareness going on there. And a lot of people don't even understand that. And then they certainly don't know what to do with it once they hear it, but the idea of challenging your experiences and challenging your belief systems so that you understand what you're bringing into a relationship, or what you're applying to your relationship so that the relationship can be better, and you've brought up a couple times, especially in Clubhouse, that, one of my favorite quotes is, "What doesn't kill you might make you weak." Because I hate that saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," because we have experiences every single day. And there's a couple things about that. Number one, you get better at whatever you do, whatever you repeatedly do, right? It doesn't mean that it's good or productive. It just means that you get better at it. And then that's where bad habits come from. So, if I come home from a bad day at work and I yell at my spouse, one day, okay, maybe that's just a bad day, but I do that 2 or 3 times, and my brain's going to start saying, okay, well, after a bad day, you can take it out on your spouse. I'm creating those bad habits. So you can't come out of your experiences just assuming that what you did was right or what you did was productive. You have to have the willingness to really reflect on, what am I doing? And is it the most productive thing for the situation? Not even for me, but just the situation. Sometimes the right answer isn't what I want to hear.
Yeah, that's true. And I want to touch on something, because I think it's important what you said. When we talk about stepchildren, that's really something that provides a whole new ball of wax, because I had 2 stepbrothers, and, my dad made a choice. right? And he made a choice to be involved full time with another family. So, the way that made me feel, and the stickiness and the sticking points, to where when I did go to visit him, I felt like a guest and not a part of the family, because those were, my two stepbrothers and my stepmother were living with him full time. They got the best and the worst of him, right? So, where does it come in when we visit? Now, granted, my stepbrothers and I got along very well. And I had to make a decision. That's where we really extracted the wisdom, when we were looking to say, how is this relationship going to be? And me being a kid, I wanted to be selfish. I'll be completely transparent with you. I wanted to have alone time with my father, be able to go fishing, be able to take a trip, do the things that dads and sons do, right? And I think that was one of the things that I struggled with, because I didn't understand the concept of sharing. And, feeling a little, not cheated, but I felt like it was a little shortchanged, because that time was very limited, and he focused his attention on his career and his family, which I understand why now. And I believe that dynamic, when we start throwing, bonus children in, how did the relationships go horizontally when we have, kids who are sisters and brothers and have multiple parents? How does that really go into the mix? It's almost like throwing, the whites and the colors in and hoping that the red doesn't bleed into the lights. So I found that was probably the most challenging, yet also the most rewarding and the biggest lessons learned. So I'm glad that you brought that point up.
When I started coming up with the concept of champion stepdad, it's because of my degree in performance psychology. And the idea behind the foundation of what we're doing is empathy and accountability. Men want to hang out with other guys who have something in common. So whether that be your sports, your military, your police, your mountain bikers, your runners, like people gravitate to people with similar experiences or wants or desires, right? And as a you're involved in Front Row Dads. Had Mike Higgins on here a few weeks ago. He's heavily involved in Front Row Dads, and I'm very aware of the work that you guys do. And I think it's phenomenal. And it's actually kind of some of the stuff I've been checking out is what I'm using to build Champion Stepdad, because I'm going to do something similar, but it's just a little bit more niche down to specifically to stepdads. And I don't see one as a competition with the other. I celebrate you guys for what you're doing, and I think it's fantastic. And if there's anybody listening that's something you're interested in, go look it up, man. Front Row Dads is a fantastic organization. I love what you guys are doing. But I wanted to build this thing on empathy and accountability, because it's being a stepdad is tough, but you also chose to be here. There's no accidental stepdads. Let's just put that out there. If you're a stepdad, you made a logical choice to walk into a relationship with children that are not yours, right? So that right there, 100% accountability. You chose to be here. But then also from there, where do you go, right? Because we talk a lot about, we hear, you and I, we're involved with speakers and authors and coaches and all these people. And there's a lot of people out there with some really great theories. But my question is always how, right? Because you can ask the why question, sure, like that's a business question. I want to know the how, and it really does come down to it's about skills and processes of, I want you to tell us what are some of the things that you did, whether you realized it or not. Like, what are some skills that you used throughout your childhood and then into young adulthood, where you not only made it through, but you thrived, but then maybe looking back on it, you're like, oh, I either did that well, or I could have done that better. Let's talk about some how that we do this.
Yeah, that's a great question, Neil. And, I would just start off by saying experience was the best teacher. The hows were very important to me, because I realized what I could and what I couldn't get away with. Right. And I think as we're young men growing into, mature adults, we test boundaries. High level achievers, people who play sports, people who are involved in something competitively, they tend to see where the limit or where the line is, and they want to push it and actually step over it. So some of the things that I learned very quickly were, number one is, how do I get that attention from my father and get that respect and get that acknowledgement? And what that drove me to do was, in some cases, in an unhealthy boundary, I wanted to excel, and I felt like my worth was attached to my accomplishment. Were we getting the medal around our neck? Were we getting the trophy? We didn't want the participation trophy. We wanted first place. And so what that did was that was a driver and a mechanism to say, okay, so how do I achieve this goal? Well, what I did was I prepared, right? It taught me the art of preparation and getting a laser focus on a vision to do something and check that box and accomplish something. So what this did was, even though it wasn't being taught, we were finding a way through these neurological pathways that we call a brain to say, hey, I want something. How do I achieve the goal? How do I work backwards? And I had many mentors in life. You know, a lot of times, I would say the most intellectual people that I learn from are the people who speak the least. These are people that I get a chance to watch, pay very close attention to, and when they're not speaking, why they aren't speaking. Well, it's because they're listening and learning. And so how do we listen and learn? Well, number one is we don't have to comment on everything. We can actually just sit back and watch. And I would say that the longer that we watch someone, meaning a period of time, maybe a year or 10 years, we're going to trust their behavior is consistent. I had a coach. I played high school sports and college sports, and my coach is still into my life today. I met him at 12 years old. And we got a chance to coach side by side together. And he taught me so many things about how to listen, how to be patient, how to be respectful, how to be kind, and how to be gracious. And so I think that, you know, when you ask those how questions, it's how do we learn these things? Well, I think that we learn by associating ourselves with the people that we align with, that we want to be like 5, 10, 15 years from now. You know, I honestly have the utmost respect and the tremendous amount of respect for stepdads who have kids who said, I'm going to take on this responsibility like they're my own. I'm going to raise them. I'm going to do everything I need to do, and I'm going to stick even when times get tough. And so I know the very first thing is, well, not my problem. And they throw up their hands. And I used to be like that when I was a kid. It's like, hey, not my problem. Solve my problems for me. And it was a really tough lesson to learn, because I found that, you know, my stepdad never did those things. He always said, hey, I'm here. I'm going to let you know I'm here. Whenever you need me, give me a call or come talk to me. His door was always open. He didn't force those beliefs. So I hope that answered maybe a couple of your questions as far as the how. I know that it's just such a complex subject, and there's really no textbook or manual that we're given as fathers, let alone stepfathers, to say, how do we deal with this ever-changing moving target in this dynamic, which, you know, you're co-parenting and you have multiple personalities in the way that they approach life. I would say that that is something that we learn by example and we live by learning.
Well, and the idea of building relationships and being around people, aligning yourself with other people, that's something that I'm trying to lean heavily on. That this is not just a podcast. The podcast is just the easiest thing. It was easy for me because I'd done podcasts before, and I also have the willingness to put myself in front of a crowd and not care what people think about me. So, but the idea of building a community, worldwide community, I already have people that I'm connected with in the UK. In a couple of days, I'm going to be getting on the phone with Sean O'Gorman, who's a former Australian police officer. You shaking your head, you know, Sean O'Gorman's a stud, dude. He is amazing, you know, and it's just the idea of making the connections all around the world with people who either are doing what you want to do or are willing to hold you accountable to what you say that you want to do. And that alone has been very dramatic for me, because I always kind of figured that was the idea. And I've got a couple close friends that have always been my friends, and they've always stuck with me. And I've seen other people come and go, and not everybody's meant to be in your life for forever. And I get that. But the more intentional you can be about the people that are in your life and the reason why you want them to be in your life is, you know, it's very powerful. And there's something to be said for the circle of people that you find yourself in. And that brings up another thing of, I've got a very strong emphasis on moving from default to deliberate. That everything that you do in your life, I mean, I would go as far as to say 99% of our body functions, whether thoughts or whatever, are default by design, because we can't focus on everything, right? If I focus on walking, I'm probably going to trip, because that's not how I'm supposed to do it. I'm supposed to just naturally walk, right? But there's a lot of default. The problem, though, is when we allow the things that should be intentional to be default without thinking about it. If I have a productive habit and that's a default habit, great, reinforce that, but make sure you understand why it's so effective. If you have something that's not so productive, then really reflect on it. And, to throwing my vulnerability out there, just because I want to be that person that's out in front and letting people know that I'm fucking things up just like everybody else. Just last night, we were outside hanging out in the front yard, and we're playing a game as the kids were riding bikes, and one of the kids got in the way, and Cindy got on his ass, and I jumped on his ass too. And she looked at me a couple of minutes, and she's like, "What are you doing?" Like, I already had it handled. What are you doing? I don't even realize I was doing it. So we all have these default mechanisms, and we're going to have our good days and our bad days. And so I think there's something to be said for just being aware of how these things happen. Just be aware of what are your beliefs, what are your thoughts, and why do you think that way, and why do you believe that way? Simply thinking critically about those things is really going to put an emphasis on what you're doing well and what you're doing wrong. And so speaking of, and that leads to, tell me about, so you talked a little bit about your relationship with your stepfather. You talked about maybe some things that he did really well. Are there some things that you could talk about that maybe he didn't do quite so well? And how did you deal with those things?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. And I would say that I think that if we were to rewind and really think about some of the experiences that we went through, I almost thought maybe it's too passive of a relationship, which means he didn't understand where the line was and what I needed at the time. So I think there is a fine line that we walk, is how much discipline do we need for each child? And so my sister, I'll give you a great example. My sister is nothing like me. She is someone who definitely has an opinion about things, is non-compliant, always likes to throw a wrench in the system. She's that person who will do whatever it takes to get a rise out of you and make sure that you get a reaction, right? If you don't get the reaction back to her, she's going to continue to push. For me, if someone said, no, that's enough, I tend to, okay, I'm compliant. And my son is like that. And so, my sister was kind of past her time, so to speak. So where she was kind of in the rebellion stage, and she moved on and moved out. So it was just kind of like me, right? It's like, so what do you do in this situation? Well, I'll be clear with you. He didn't live with us, even though they were, they were more or less common law married, so to speak. In the state of Texas, you can be with someone, and when you move in with someone, that's when you become common law. Well, they didn't actually move in together until I left for college. And so it was really, truly something that I was very curious about, and never to this day have asked why. And I would say that I think that was because of, he wasn't sure. He had kids that he also raised, and they were out of the house. And, we had more of a civil relationship, not a father-son relationship. So maybe stepping into that role a little bit might have helped to give some guidance and direction. And do I thank him for that? Yes. Do I wonder what it could have been like? Yes. So the answer is yes and yes. And I would think that, when we bring that art, there's a science to parenting, right? We know what's right and wrong. We have a moral compass. And so it's our job to make sure that we let people know if they do something incorrectly as children, why it's incorrect and why we believe what we believe. Because if they don't have that compass in the beginning, and it can go all over the place, if we're not in front of them, someone is influencing them. And I'm very fortunate to have a great group. And when you mentioned accountability, Neil, I think that deserves a lot of credit because, as co-parents, I would say that it's important that we learn from each other who are in very similar situations. We might not take the same actions, but we might encounter the same issues, and we can learn from each other in that. And that's one of the reasons why the Dads group is so genuine. We have a lot of nuclear families and we have a lot of co-parenting families, and they are able to navigate and hold each other accountable to the things that they have questions about, need help with, and want guidance, leadership, and mentorship.
Right on. Yeah, man, and I think that's the biggest thing. If you can find if you want to start somewhere, start with building your band of brothers. And I'll say that over and over, and I'm a big fan. I wouldn't say a big fan, but I'm a passive fan of Stephen Mansfield and his, Mansfield's book of Manly Men and building your band of brothers. I think it's just a good concept, because ultimately it's just the idea of just be a good dude, just be a good guy, go out and do good things in the world for yourself and for other people. There's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself, taking time for yourself. In fact, that's expected. You should be doing that. I slept in this morning, I had my coffee, went to the gym. If I'm not doing that for myself, what good am I for my family? But at the same time, I need to be aware that, my family, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. And I need to have an honest conversation, ask the question to my fiance of how am I doing? And then shut up and listen to what she has to say so that I can take the criticism or the critique or the positive reinforcement. Because she took the time the other day to let me know, hey, I really appreciate how you handled that with him. And, you were calm. And, I was like, yeah, I'm trying. Cause I've got a history. I've got parents who yelled, and I was hit a lot as a kid. I've got anger in the bottom of my soul, that's I've been dealing with for a long time. I've been in counseling for a lot. Clearly I've got two relationships. I've been in the military 26 years. There's a lot there, that I got to deal with. And I'm trying. And it's nice to get the positive reinforcement, but it's also very powerful to shut your mouth every once in a while and listen to what people have to say, because people are watching. And if you surround yourself with the right people, you're going to hear the right things. And I've got those friends that I'll go to the bar with, and they might tell me what I want to hear, and okay, that's great. That's why I don't hang out with them as much as I hang out with the other people. A friend of mine came down. He was heading out to San Diego to see his daughter, and so he stopped in for a couple nights, and we sat out in front of the house. And he's like, I've been watching you. And he's like, I got some info that you may not want to hear, but I've been watching. And he's like, I haven't seen you in 6 months, and in the last 6 hours, I got some things I got to talk to you about, but that's the kind of person that I want in my life. So I think that, the work that you do, getting out on Clubhouse, talking to people, and creating space, right? Because if somebody doesn't create it, there's going to be people out there that aren't forward enough or confident enough to create that space. So we're creating it for them. So let's do it. Let's use the space. People that are in Clubhouse, if they want to hop on, you've got a lot going on Clubhouse. You're on there a lot. And so you've got the one main group, and I just wrote it down and then I lost it. So just tell me about your experience on Clubhouse. What are you doing?
You got it. There's something that I wanted to directly tie into that. And, in the Are You Man Enough room, I constantly talk about this concept because somebody once told me, you need to have at least these 3 people in your life, and you're going to run across them no matter what. And they might come and go, but you talked about default patterns. And then you also talked about mentorship or accountability. You've got your friend telling you might not want to hear this, but I need to say it, right? So when we talk about a mentor, someone that we look up to, someone that we pay attention to, someone that we will take their wisdom and receive it. There's a big difference between someone who tells you something on the street because you don't know them, you don't have that relationship, and you don't trust them because you have no idea where they came from and no idea what their intent is, right? You also have those people in your life where when they speak, you listen, you're aware, you're attuned to what they're saying. That next person is that person that you walk beside, right? That's the guy you go play golf with, you have a beer with. You can talk about these things that are kind of the day-to-days, so to speak. I think about that mentor thinking about big picture and talking about what our life is wanting to be and about. And then you also have somebody who's watching you. You have someone that you are mentoring. And it doesn't matter if you come from a single family, a nuclear family, a blended family, always someone is watching you. And I learned that from a very wise man. So what that told me is I need to pay attention to the person I respect, acknowledge, and believe I think they have the most to offer. I need someone who I can vent to if something's going on the day-to-day, but I also have someone watching me. So I need to pay attention to how I act and I behave. And I think that that's a great philosophy to live by. You know, Brian Ward has a board of directors. He has a group of 12 men in his life that he picked, that he trusts, that are not his family members, but outside influences that can speak into his life transparently, honestly, and openly. No matter how challenging what they're about to say, they're going to bring to him, and they're going to bring it with love. And so I think that, the Are You Man Enough room that we run in the mornings, it's every morning at 9:05 Central. And we want to talk about these things because a lot of these guys right now, and we have the female perspective who comes in occasionally as well, they get a chance to talk about these things that they can't even talk about in their community. They can get it off their chest. They can learn, and we can learn from them. So I think it's just a great space that's been curated. As you said, Neil, it's a space that we need. Because men aren't used to talking and expressing things. We talk about masculine and feminine energy, how we're able to kind of weave in harmoniously through each other because we all have the masculine and feminine in us. And that's where we get a chance to really be open. And I don't want to say let our hair down because that's not the right thing to say, but I would just say we can speak freely without having any recourse. And I think that's what men need to do is they need to be able to express themselves in a psychologically safe space. They can talk about it and not feel judged or coached. And that's where I believe we make the most progress.
That's awesome. And yeah, everybody's got something that they need to share. Everybody's got experiences. Everybody has something that they're working through. But at the same time, everybody has an experience that's valuable to somebody else. Because so even those people, and I know you're out there and I know you're listening, and you're out there and you're listening, and you're like, oh, this is great. And I'm taking this information in. You have a story also. Your story is valuable to somebody else. Even if you don't have an answer, just telling your story is power in that somebody else is going to identify with your story, and just the feeling, the relief to know that somebody else out there is going through the same shit that I'm going through. That right there is relief enough for somebody to maybe then just to speak up and say, well, maybe I could do that too. It's always about somebody has to go first, right? And a leader is nothing without followers, right? So I'm not doing this thing to be a leader. I'm doing this thing to build a community and create a space where people have the opportunity to come together and have honest, vulnerable conversation, to feel empathy from other people, but then also to be held accountable and always be asked the question, what? Okay, that happened, now what? Because that's my second favorite quote. Okay, so got it. So you had a rough life. Okay, so got it. So, my 19-year-old stepson's my 19-year-old stepson's dad died, and now he's dealing with that. There's any number of situations. Okay, got it. And that sentence it's an accountability sentence, not meant to minimize what you've been through. It's meant to challenge you that, okay, what are you going to do about it? Right? Where are you in power? And you are 100% in power of what you're doing with yourself, what you believe, what you think, and your behaviors. So, the first step is get in with the community. It doesn't have to be this community, be a community. I'd be happy to say, you know what? I heard you talk about that and I found this one over here. Great. I'm not going to be mad about that. Get in with a community, get in with a group of guys that can show you empathy and hold you accountable, because that's power.
Yeah, I just have to touch on that because what you said is just so true. It's 100% on point. Just when we think we have it figured out, right? Well, sure enough, something gets a curveball, and we have to bounce that off somebody, because the more we internalize, Neil, usually the more explosive the situation can get, depending on how we respond to situations. So I just want to honor you for saying that, because what you're saying right now, community means everything to men. When we feel like we're alone on our little island and we have to figure everything out by ourselves, guess what? We're not. And we're just a phone call away. We're an app away. And I would just say, beware of social media, because when we think we have it all together, I'll be the first to volunteer this information. My life, I will never have all together. There is always something, right? The pot is boiling on the stove. Go get that. Something's burning in the oven. Oh, the sink's still on. Oh, my kid just, jumped in the pool with all their clothes on. There's always going to be something, right? So I would just say, embrace the chaos. Embrace the chaos, because a lot of what we're tested for is how much can we handle and how many plates can we spin? How many balls can we juggle at the same time? We're going to drop them at times. The question is, are we going to pick them up? Are we going to learn from it and get better at doing it? So I really appreciate that question and insight that you had.
Yeah, that's cool, man. So outside of Clubhouse, what do you got going on?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm doing a lot more traveling now, and we knew that 2021 was going to be a year of travel. I put on national bodybuilding events all over the country, one of them in Houston, one of them in Scottsdale, Arizona, and then 2 in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand. So, my life is about traveling to the West Coast, for one weekend or 1 week a month from here on out for the next 12 weeks. So that definitely throws a wrench in the system when it comes to how do we manage our family during this? How is my wife feeling? How much pressure does that put on her? How can I support her in that? And I got to tell you, there's no formula that's perfect. It changes every month. She's very fluid about it. I have to say that we have one of the best support systems. And I have to say that she is so resilient at the things that she is able to do. It blows my mind. I have to tell you, I'm thoroughly blessed in the fact that she's got my back. And you know what? There's times where I screw up, and it's probably every day at this point. She's still willing to give me a little bit of grace and forgiveness, and just hope that continues and it is extended as we enter this travel time. So a lot going on, but more importantly, it's important that I spend the quality time with my family and my kids, getting the individual time with them, getting the family time, even if it's a little bit shorter lived. It's important that they know that I'm here for them, even though I'm not. And, physically in presence, I'm here for them. If whatever they need, they got. And that's my goal, is for them to feel valued, honored, acknowledged, and also feel like they can grow into their own person.
That's awesome, man. So Matt Storm, he's very active on Clubhouse. If you're able to get on Clubhouse, if you need invites, let me know. I've got some. You can find him at the Matt Storm. He's on the Are You Man Enough group, and I know you're in a bunch of rooms besides that. Instagram at Matt Storm Official. Dude, this has been great, and I'm really excited to be connected with you and see. And I'm excited for you to come to Arizona when you're in town. You definitely got to hit me up. And I know. In the Champion Stepdad Facebook group, I know we've got, I think 3 or 4 of the guys are here in the area. So maybe we can get something together, because my intent is to do online summits, to do in-person gatherings. And maybe that's something that we can start when you come into town. Maybe we'll hit something up. So we will definitely plan, and we'll figure something out. Like, I don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to figure it out.
That's what we do.
But man, I really appreciate your time. Really enjoyed having you on the show.
Neil, thank you. It was an honor and a privilege, my friend. And thank you so much for what you're doing for this community. I know it's really needed, really important, and well recognized. So thank you so much.